take a breath. At some point in life, we have all been Joseph. You know the feeling. It is the sharp, sudden sting of betrayal from someone you trusted. It is the crushing weight of a false accusation that you cannot shake, no matter how hard you fight. It is the suffocating, absolute silence of a season that refuses to end. You wait for a change, a sign, or an exit, but the walls only seem to close in tighter. We have all stood in that dark place where the path forward is invisible and the past feels like a trap. But today, we trace the journey of a man whose life serves as the ultimate blueprint for a comeback. If you feel like your life is currently stalled in a pit, listen closely. This is how you prepare for the palace. Uneven favor weighed heavy. Joseph stood apart, not by choice, but by the weight of the visions he carried. He spoke of dreams that arrived in the night, vivid prophetic images of sheaves bowing and stars aligning in his honor. These were not just dreams, they were declarations. Then came the gift. Jacob presented Joseph with a distinct, multicolored garment. It was meant to be a mark of love, but in the fields and the tents, it acted as a lightning rod for something far more volatile. Every time Joseph moved, the vibrant colors caught the sun, and every time the brothers looked at him, their jaws tightened. It was a visual reminder of their father's preference, a constant, glowing irritant that turned their annoyance into a deep, jagged resentment. The home was no longer a place of rest. It was a theater of growing hostility. The atmosphere thickened as the seeds of a cold, calculated hatred began to take root. Joseph did not understand the weight of his own words. He stood before his brothers, eyes bright with the excitement of his visions, and spoke of the sheaves in the field. He described his own sheaf standing tall, while theirs bowed low to the ground. He saw stars bow, naive to the brewing storm. As he talked, the brothers stopped their work. The rhythmic sound of their labor ceased. They let him finish, but the silence that followed was not one of reflection. It was the silence of a trap being set. Their eyes locked onto his, not with brotherly affection, but with a cold, piercing intensity that stripped away the pretense of family. They began to move, closing the distance between them and the boy who had dared to dream of their submission. The tragedy of the situation lay in the gap between who Joseph was and who he was becoming. He was still a boy, unrefined and prone to speaking without measuring the cost. Yet, the divine blueprint for his life did not require a finished product. It demanded only the raw material of his existence. Perfection is not a prerequisite for purpose. Instead, the process of transformation often begins in the middle of our most glaring flaws. Think of the sculptor who sees the statue hidden within the rough, unhewn block of marble. The chisel does not avoid the jagged edges or the imperfections. It strikes them to reveal the form beneath. Joseph was that block, unpolished, naive, and deeply human. His arrogance was not a barrier to his destiny. It was the very surface the chisel would soon strike. God does not wait for the dust to settle or for the character to be fully formed before initiating a call. He works with the mess, the pride, and the vulnerability of the present moment. He takes the unrefined spirit and begins the long, arduous work of carving out a leader. Joseph stood in the field, unaware that the very traits that made him difficult to love were the ones being prepared for a throne. The shaping had begun, even if the tools of that shaping were about to become cold, hard, and unforgiving. The field was silent, save for the dry rustle of stalks in the wind. Joseph turned, expecting a response to his words, but found only a wall of hostility. The brothers moved with terrifying coordination, fanning out to cut off every path of retreat. There was no shouting, no debate, and no room for explanation. He struggled, twisting his body and digging his heels into the dust, but their grip was iron. They did not care for his pleas or the confusion in his eyes. He landed hard on the dirt, his breath knocked from his lungs. They stood over him, their faces masks of cold, calculated indifference. Stern faces loomed, unforgiving lines etched, ready. They did not wait. Two of them grabbed his arms, dragging him toward the jagged opening in the earth. Joseph dug his boots into the soil, but the ground gave way, and he tumbled into the void. He hit the bottom hard, the breath leaving his body in a sharp, painful gasp. The pit was narrow, smelling of damp limestone and ancient decay. He scrambled to his feet, clawing at the rough, vertical walls, but his fingers found no purchase. He looked up. The sky was a tiny, distant circle of light, framed by the silhouettes of his brothers. He called out, his voice cracking, pleading for a reason, for mercy. Above, there was no answer. He heard the scrape of stone and the thud of heavy boots as they settled on the rim. Then, the rhythmic sound of chewing began. They sat in the dirt, passing food back and forth, their conversation low and steady. They ate while he wept. They drank while he paced the small, dark floor. Every sob he uttered was met with the casual indifference of men finishing a meal. He was inches away from them, yet he had never been more alone. A rhythmic clatter of hooves and the jingle of brass bells cut through the stillness of the field. The brothers stood, their eyes locking onto a line of dust rising on the horizon. A caravan of Midianite traders was approaching, their camels laden with spices and textiles. The brothers did not hide. They stepped into the path, waving the caravan to a halt. Joseph heard the muffled exchange of voices from the rim of the pit. He pressed his ear against the cold stone, straining to catch the words. The tone was not one of conflict, but of commerce. He heard the clink of metal against metal, the sound of coins being counted. One of the brothers pointed toward the pit, and a trader leaned over the edge, his face a dark shadow against the sky. The finality of the moment hit him when a rope dropped into the darkness, coiling at his feet like a snake. Rough hands hauled Joseph upward, the rope biting into his wrists. He was shoved toward the caravan, the heavy iron chains clinking against his ankles with every forced step. He looked back once, but the brothers had already turned away, their faces set in hard, unreadable lines. As the caravan moved out, kicking up a thick cloud of red dust, the brothers remained behind to finish their work. One of them pulled a goat from the flock, its bleating silenced by a single, swift motion. They held the coat over the animal, letting the dark, warm blood soak deep into the fibers until the original colors were lost to a jagged crimson stain. They marched back to their father, the heavy fabric clutched in their hands. Jacob stood at the edge of the camp, his eyes searching the horizon. When they dropped the ruined coat at his feet, he did not speak. He reached down, his fingers trembling as they touched the wet, sticky surface. The desert sun beat down with relentless intensity, turning the sand into a furnace beneath Joseph's feet. Each step in the heavy iron shackles sent a jolt of pain up his shins, yet he kept moving. The traders did not speak to him. They treated him as a beast of burden, a silent object in their long line of cargo. He watched the horizon, waiting for a sign of rescue that never came. His throat was parched, his skin cracked from the dry wind, and the weight of his isolation threatened to crush his spirit. But in the quiet, empty spaces between his breaths, the panic began to subside. He remembered the dreams that once unsettled his brothers. He realized that if God had spoken to him in the safety of his father's house, that same voice could reach him here in the dust. The chains were heavy, but they did not bind his mind. He stopped looking at the path behind him and started watching the road ahead. The Lord was with him in the heat. The Lord was with him in the silence. He was not abandoned, he was being prepared. The gates of the estate opened, and the life of a slave began in earnest. Joseph was not given a moment to rest. He was assigned to the lowest tasks, hauling water and scrubbing stone floors until his hands were raw. Yet, he worked with a focus that drew the attention of the overseers. He did not complain, and he did not slacken his pace. Potiphar, a man of high rank, watched from the balcony as Joseph organized the chaotic grain stores and corrected the faulty ledgers. The efficiency was undeniable. Where there had been waste, there was now order. Where there had been confusion, there was now a clear system. Potiphar began to delegate more, moving Joseph from the fields to the inner chambers. Within months, the entire estate was under his hand. Potiphar stopped checking the books entirely, trusting Joseph with every key and every secret. The status of a slave remained, but the authority was that of a master. Joseph moved through the halls with a quiet, steady confidence, his character proving itself in the small daily tasks. He was building a life from nothing. The stability Joseph had cultivated was shattered in a single violent afternoon. Potiphar's wife had watched him with a predatory focus for weeks, her demands growing bolder as the house grew quiet. He tore free, a cloak left behind, and bolted toward the exit. He reached the threshold, but she was faster with her accusations than he was with his feet. She screamed, drawing the household guard to the scene before he could even explain. She held the fabric as evidence, weaving a story of betrayal that turned the entire staff against him. Potiphar returned home to find his wife in tears. The rage in Potiphar's eyes was absolute. He stripped Joseph of his keys, his authority, and his dignity in one swift motion. The guards dragged him into the damp, lightless bowels of the prison. The heavy iron door groaned shut, sealing him away. The prison was a world of damp stone and rhythmic dripping. Joseph learned to track the passage of time by the thin sliver of light that crawled across the wall each day. When the king's cupbearer and baker were thrown into the same cell, their fear was palpable. They spoke of dreams that haunted their sleep, and Joseph listened. He interpreted the visions with clarity, telling the cupbearer he would be restored to his position within 3 days. Joseph made one request: "Remember me when you are back in the palace." The cupbearer nodded, his eyes fixed on the exit. 3 days later, the guards came. They took the cupbearer and left the baker. Joseph watched the heavy door swing shut, waiting for the messenger who would secure his release. Days turned into weeks. Weeks stretched into months. The seasons changed outside, but the air in the cell remained stagnant and cold. 2 years passed in absolute, suffocating silence. The cupbearer never sent word. Joseph sat in the dark, watching the same sliver of light crawl across the wall, his hands calloused from the stone floor. He had no status, no influence, and no advocate. Every morning he woke to the same iron bars, testing his resolve in the quiet. He did not break. He waited. The palace was in turmoil. Pharaoh had woken from the same dream twice, his mind gripped by visions of gaunt cows and withered grain that no advisor could decipher. The court was a flurry of frantic whispers and failed interpretations. In the heat of the panic, the cupbearer's memory finally ignited. He stepped forward, his voice trembling as he spoke of the Hebrew prisoner who had unlocked his own fate years prior. Pharaoh did not hesitate. He dispatched his personal guard to the dungeon immediately. The heavy iron gate, which had remained locked for 2 years, groaned open with a screech of rusted metal. Joseph stood, his eyes adjusting to the sudden blinding glare of torches held by soldiers. They did not offer explanations. They grabbed him by the arms and hauled him out. He was marched through the corridors, the air shifting from the stench of stagnant water to the scent of incense and polished stone. They forced him to shave and change, stripping away the grime of the cell before shoving him into the throne room. Pharaoh sat on his elevated seat, his gaze fixed on the man who had been forgotten. Joseph stood before the monarch, his feet finally touching marble instead of dirt. The silence in the room was heavy, waiting for the words that would decide the fate of Egypt. Joseph spoke without hesitation. He laid out the 7 years of abundance and the 7 years of famine that would follow. He did not stop at the warning. He provided a strategy for survival. Pharaoh watched him, the tension in the throne room snapping. The monarch turned to his advisors, his decision already made. He pulled the heavy gold signet ring from his own finger and pressed it into Joseph's palm. The metal was cool and etched with the royal seal. Pharaoh commanded his servants to bring the finest linen and a gold chain to place around Joseph's neck. The guards who had dragged him from the dungeon now bowed their heads as he passed. Joseph was led to the second chariot of the kingdom, the wheels churning against the palace courtyard as the heralds shouted for the people to make way. The transition was absolute. He stood in the chariot, his gaze fixed on the horizon, the weight of the kingdom resting on his shoulders. The prisoner was gone. The prime minister had arrived. The famine did not discriminate. It withered the crops in Canaan just as it had across the known world, leaving the fields barren and the storehouses empty. Driven by the gnawing ache of hunger, the brothers packed their meager supplies and traveled south toward the heart of Egypt. They arrived at the capital, their faces etched with the exhaustion of the journey and the desperation of their plight. They were directed to the central granary, a massive structure where the prime minister oversaw the distribution of life-saving grain. The brothers moved through the crowd, their heads low, clutching their empty sacks. They were ushered into the presence of the man in charge. The hall was silent, save for the rhythmic clatter of grain being measured into stone vessels. Joseph stood on a raised platform, his stature commanding. The brothers did not look up. They did not see the eyes that had once wept in a pit. They saw only the authority of Egypt, As they approached the dais, they fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads against the cold, polished floor. The brothers were now bowing before his feet. Joseph stared down at the men huddled on the floor. They were broken, their shoulders shaking with the weight of their own survival. He looked for the brothers he remembered, but found only men aged by regret and the crushing reality of their current dependence. The air in the hall grew thick, stifling. Joseph gripped the edge of the stone dais until his knuckles turned white. The memory of the pit, the smell of goat blood, and the long, silent years in the dark surged forward, tearing through his carefully maintained composure. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Then, the dam broke. A single, jagged sob escaped him, followed by a wail that tore through the silence. It was not the controlled grief of a statesman. It was the raw, unrefined sound of a man who had finally reached the end of his endurance. He wept with such intensity that the sound bounced off the high vaulted ceilings. The attendants nearby froze, their faces pale, unsure whether to approach or flee. Joseph collapsed back into his chair, his face buried in his hands, his body racked by the force of the release. The echoes of his weeping filled every corner of the palace. The echoes of his grief finally faded, leaving a heavy, expectant silence in the hall. Joseph wiped his face, his breathing slowing to a steady, rhythmic pace. He gestured sharply to the guards and attendants, his hand cutting through the air. They hesitated, then bowed and retreated, their footsteps muffled by the heavy tapestries. Joseph faced his brothers, who has been seated in exact order by age, from firstborn to oldest, stunned, trembling. Joseph took his hand and rested on the shoulder of the youngest brother. Unsure how to handle the situation, he spoke, his voice low but carrying the weight of a decade of silence. "I am Joseph." The brothers froze. They looked up, their faces pale, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. They expected the executioner's blade. Instead, Joseph knelt before all his brothers, his gaze steady and tearful. "God brought me here to save lives." The brothers stood in the quiet hall, the weight of their past finally dissolving into the reality of the present. Joseph had walked a path paved with betrayal, yet he emerged not as a victim, but as a vessel. His life stands as a testament that the pit is never the final destination. It is a pipeline. The very things designed to bury him, the chains, the false accusations, the years of forgotten silence, were the exact tools used to build the foundation of his authority. Every moment of suffering was a necessary step in a larger architecture he could not see from the bottom of the well. We often view our own seasons of hardship as dead ends, signs that we have been abandoned or forgotten. But the story of Joseph demands a different perspective. It teaches us that betrayal is not a wall, it is a bridge. It is the narrow path that leads to a breakthrough far greater than the one we originally envisioned. The dark times we experience is not meant to consume us, but to forge the character required to steward the promise waiting on the other side. The pit is not your grave, it is your preparation. Whatever pit you occupy today, remember that the architect of your life has not changed his mind about you. The dream you carried did not die in the darkness. Your current mess is not the end of your story. It is the foundation of your future. Keep your character clean, stay faithful to God in the quiet, and trust that the same God that moved Joseph from the dungeon to the throne is working all things together for your good. The waiting is not wasted time. It is the forging of your resolve. Stand firm in faith. Hold on to the vision. Your palace is coming. Trust in God.